All right, buckle up, everybody. We're going deep on Agile estimation with Fibonacci today.
Sounds exciting.
It is, actually. And we've got this awesome article by Mike Cohn of Mountain Goat Software as our guide.
Oh, yeah, Mike Cohn.
He really knows his stuff.
Yeah, he's like the Agile guru.
You can tell he's really passionate about this, too, from the way he writes.
Definitely.
So our mission today is to figure out not just how Agile teams use Fibonacci, we all kind of know that part, but like why it works so well, you know?
Just getting to the underlying why.
Exactly.
It's not just the what.
The why. So let's imagine for a second you're on an Agile team.
Okay.
And you've got to estimate the effort for all these complex tasks. If you're just using regular numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4, it can get really tough to tell the difference between them, especially when the numbers get bigger.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Like, is a task that we estimate as a 5 really that different from a 6?
Yeah, you start to lose the granularity.
Yeah, you lose that precision.
Especially with the bigger numbers.
Yeah, exactly. And that's where I think this idea of Weber's law comes in.
Yeah, Weber's law basically says that the bigger the thing you're measuring, the harder it is to tell the difference between it and something that's only a little bit bigger.
So like, to use an analogy from Mike's article, picking up a 1 kilogram weight versus a 2 kilogram weight. Easy to tell the difference.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
But try doing that with 20 kilograms versus 21.
Almost impossible.
I can't even tell.
Yeah, our brains just aren't good at making those tiny distinctions when things are already large.
That's the same with effort, right?
Exactly.
Estimating effort for large tasks.
Absolutely. So the beauty of the Fibonacci sequence, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, and so on, is that it kind of naturally reflects Weber's law.
Oh, interesting.
Each number is about 60% larger than the one before it.
So it's not just some random math thing. It's like it's baked into how our brains work.
Yeah, it's kind of how we naturally perceive differences in size.
So instead of agonizing over these tiny little distinctions, is it a 4 or a 5, we're thinking more broadly like, is this task roughly double the size of that one or triple?
Yeah, it's about the relative size, not the absolute precision.
And that just seems way more practical.
Especially when you're dealing with complex projects.
Absolutely. I never thought about it that way before.
It's a real game changer when you start thinking in terms of relative effort.
And I think that leads to much more meaningful conversations too.
Absolutely.
Right? Instead of getting bogged down in, is it a 4 or a 5?
Right, exactly.
You're actually talking about the real work involved.
What actually goes into completing the task?
Yeah, the substance of it.
Focusing on the why.
Exactly.
Instead of getting lost in the numbers.
And you know what else I found fascinating in Mike's article? He talks about how sometimes even pure Fibonacci isn't enough.
Yeah, it's not a one-size-fits-all solution.
Right, like his teams started modifying the sequence for larger tasks.
Interesting. What do you mean?
Rounding those higher numbers up. So instead of 21, 34, 55, they'd use 20, 40, 100.
Ah, I see.
Like acknowledging that
it's impossible to be that precise.
Yeah. They can't be that precise with those huge tasks.
Especially in Agile, there's so much uncertainty built in.
It's like saying, hey, we know these are really hard to estimate.
Right.
Let's not kid ourselves.
Let's be realistic about it.
Exactly. And then Mike went even further. He experimented with a simple doubling sequence, like 1, 2, 4, 8.
Huh.
Both modified Fibonacci and doubling seemed to work well for his teams, but there was a subtle difference between them.
I'm curious to hear your thoughts on that. What did you find?
It's interesting, right? Like before this whole deep dive, I thought Fibonacci estimation was just about,
picking numbers
out of a hat.
Yeah.
But it's really about like how our brains work.
It is. It's about psychology almost.
It's fascinating.
Yeah, it's about understanding how we perceive differences in size and then using that to our advantage.
And that's such a good point because I think that leads perfectly into something else that Mike Cohn mentioned.
Okay, what's that?
He noticed this, like big difference in the types of conversations that teams had.
Interesting.
When they used different estimation systems.
Oh, okay.
Specifically when teams use that doubling sequence, 1, 2, 4, 8, the one.
Yeah.
They'd often get stuck debating whether a task was precisely double the size of another.
Oh, yeah, that's so common.
It happens all the time.
It's like the numbers take over and you forget about the actual work.
Yeah, you get fixated on the math.
Yeah.
Instead of like
the reality of the situation.
The actual work. It becomes like, is it really twice as big?
Exactly.
Instead of what makes this task complex.
Right. You lose the nuance.
Totally.
The bigger picture.
So how do you think, how can teams avoid falling into that trap?
I think the key is to remember that estimation is a tool. It's not...
It's not the end-all be-all.
Yeah, it's not about being perfectly precise.
Right. It's about understanding.
Understanding, yeah.
And we're not machines. We can't quantify complexity with absolute certainty.
So it's like embracing that uncertainty
Mm-hmm.
and focusing on the factors that like genuinely influence effort.
Exactly. The potential challenges, the dependencies, the things that can really throw off a simple time estimate.
Yeah, all those unknowns.
Absolutely. And that's where the conversation becomes so important.
Communication.
Yeah, it's about bringing those factors to light, talking about them openly, and arriving at a shared understanding of what the task really entails.
Not just like throwing a number on it and moving on.
Exactly. It's about using estimation to have those deeper discussions.
Yeah, it's a process.
It's a process of collaboration and getting a more realistic view of the work.
This is so insightful. It's making me think about like the language that we use on my own team.
Interesting.
When we talk about effort,
Yeah.
do we get caught up in those, is it really double debates?
Right.
Or are we actually focusing on what makes a task genuinely complex?
That's such an important question to ask yourself,
I think so.
because it's about analyzing those dynamics within your team.
Mm-hmm.
Are you having productive conversations, or are you getting stuck in the system?
That's a great point.
Yeah.
And I think that brings us to like this really important takeaway.
Okay.
There's no one-size-fits-all solution when it comes to agile estimation.
Oh, absolutely not.
What works for one team might not work for another.
Every team is different. Every project is different.
And that's the beauty of agile, right? It's
Yeah.
about flexibility,
Need adaptability.
continuous improvement.
Yeah, find what works best for you.
Don't be afraid to experiment.
Exactly.
And I think never underestimate the human element, you know?
Oh, for sure.
No matter what system you choose,
Mhm.
like open communication,
Mhm.
willingness to collaborate, those are paramount.
Couldn't agree more.
So at the end of the day, it's about empowering teams to make good decisions together based on a shared understanding
Shared understanding. Yeah,
of the work.
that's the goal.
This has been, like, seriously eye-opening.
It's fascinating stuff.
I'm starting to see Fibonacci estimation in a whole new light.
Yeah, it's powerful when you really dig into it.
But there's one piece of the puzzle I'm still kind of stuck on.
Okay, what's that?
Story points.
Ah, yes.
Mike Kuhn mentions them in the article,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm a little fuzzy on what they actually are
Sure.
and how they fit into everything we've been talking about. All right, so story points. Let's try to break this down a little.
Yeah, it's a concept that trips a lot of people up.
It does. It really does.
But it's actually pretty simple once you wrap your head around it.
Okay, I'm ready.
Think of a story point as like a unit of measurement.
Okay.
But instead of measuring time, like hours or days,
Right.
it measures effort.
Okay, so it's not about how long something takes,
No.
but how much work is involved.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But it's even more nuanced than that. A story point also takes into account like all the factors that can make a task tricky, the complexity, the risk, the uncertainty.
All the stuff that can throw off a simple time estimate.
Exactly. It's like a holistic view of a task's bigness, you know? Recognizing that some tasks just feel heavier than others.
Yeah.
Even if they might seem like they'd take the same amount of time on paper.
They just like have this extra weight to them.
Exactly. Story points capture that feeling, that sense of overall effort. And guess what? The Fibonacci sequence we've been talking about,
Yeah.
it comes into play here too.
Oh, interesting.
When assigning story points to tasks, teams usually use that modified Fibonacci sequence 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, 20, and so on.
It's all about relative sizing again.
Exactly. So instead of saying, this task will take 4 hours,
Right.
you're comparing it to other tasks and saying, this one feels like a 5, that one feels more like an 8.
This one's a 2, that was a 13.
Precisely. And remember, it's a team effort. You discuss the task, consider all the potential challenges, and then decide together on a story point value.
So it's not just like the project manager coming in and saying, this is an 8, that's a 5.
Definitely not. It's a collaborative process. And through that conversation, the team develops a shared understanding of what each story point represents.
So like a 5 might mean something different for my team than it does for your team.
Right, but within your team, you have that consistent understanding.
We know what a 5 feels like.
Yeah, it's like building a shared vocabulary for effort.
I like that.
And once you have that, you can start using story points to plan sprints and track progress in a way that's actually realistic.
So instead of saying, we can do 40 hours of work in this sprint,
Right.
we're saying, we can realistically handle 50 story points.
Yeah, it's a more accurate reflection of your team's capacity, considering all those complexities we talked about.
Taking all those factors into account.
Exactly. And that's why story points are such a valuable tool in Agile planning. They help teams forecast more accurately, manage their workload better, and just continuously improve their understanding of effort.
This has been, wow.
A real deep dive.
It really has. We started with how our brains perceive differences
Yeah, how we naturally make sense of size.
and explored how the Fibonacci sequence kind of reflects that.
It's built into the way we think.
And now we've connected it all the way to story points and agile planning.
It's amazing how these seemingly simple concepts can lead to such profound changes in the way we work.
I know, right? And I think what's really stuck with me is that it's not about being mathematically perfect.
It's not about the numbers themselves.
It's about finding a system
That works for you.
that helps your team have better conversations,
Have those meaningful discussions.
make more informed decisions, and ultimately,
Deliver better results.
that's what it's all about.
The heart of Agile, right there.
You know, to our listeners out there, if you're feeling inspired to rethink your own estimation process,
I hope so.
remember what we've learned today.
Don't be afraid to experiment. Find what works best for your team. And,
Keep asking why.
yeah, keep diving deeper.
Absolutely.